Hello and welcome to this presentation on our final essay of the semester, the causal essay. The subject for this will be handled in the next slide, and in this presentation I will also go over all of the various requirements for the introduction, the body paragraphs, and the conclusion. In order to correctly execute this assignment, it is important that you read the Stephen King essay that I provided for you. The Stephen King essay deals with why we enjoy horror films. And I want you to not imitate King, but to examine, as he does, some peculiar form of fun. Now, there are some forbidden topics, which I'll talk about in a second, but I use the term peculiar because I want you to understand that whatever you're writing about is going to be peculiar to the majority of people. For example, some of you enjoy hunting, and yet every time I ask this question in the class, who hunts? Only about between 10 and 25%. 25% is pretty high. 25% of the students in the class raise their hand. That means that the other 3/4 of the students, which is 3 times the number of hunters, don't hunt. And so for them, hunting is a peculiar form of activity. It really doesn't matter how popular the activity you're engaged in or that you want to write about. It doesn't matter how popular it is. The majority of people in the world do not engage in that particular activity. So, calling it peculiar is to remind you that you need to explain to these people who don't understand why some people enjoy this activity, why they do. And it's also important in terms of the introduction and conclusion. So you've seen the prompt here. So let me go over the basic requirements. As usual, 2 to 3 pages, typed MLA formatting that includes double space, proper heading and pagination, page number, and your last name, and then a 12-point Times New Roman font. The forbidden topics. Obviously, sometimes students get a little bit confused. Horror movies or haunted houses, anything that would have the same causes as Stephen King's essay, that's off the table. So do not write about horror films, horror books, anything like that. Leave horror away. Okay. Now then, anything that is not an activity you cannot write about. So if you want to write about football, let's say, but you start writing about why people enjoy watching football, that's off the table. It's an activity. I consider spectating, watching something to be a passive endeavor. So if you want to write about football, you have to write about why people enjoy playing football. So it needs to be an activity. Drug use, theft, child abuse, or any other kind of criminal activity is off the table. If you write about such a thing, I am legally bound to turn you into the police. So please don't do that. Cheating or any other type of injustice. I know that there are people who enjoy cheating, but that's not something I want to read about, so that is off the table. Self-abuse, including but not limited to alcohol abuse, cutting, or any other activity that seriously damages the body or psyche. Again, there are people who engage in that behavior, some of whom might think they're engaging in something fun. That is not something I want to read about, so do not write about that. Addiction is not a fun activity. Addiction is a compulsion. People do it because they're compelled to do it, not because they choose to enjoy it. So that is off the table. Any kind of sexual behavior. All right, I don't think I need to explain that to you, but just to explain this, all of the topics that I have listed here that are forbidden, I've gotten papers on them. So there's a reason why I have these rules here. And then, of course, anything to do with religion, I don't want to read about it. Keep it off the table. So if you have questions, if you're not sure whether the topic you selected is on the table or not, please email me or ask me directly. The introduction for any paper and the conclusion for any paper, there are no rules. By the way, please disregard Essay 4. This is not Essay 4. This is Essay 3. This used to be the fourth essay before we limited the number of essays we taught to 3. So please disregard that. An introduction, like a conclusion, depends on the subject matter, the person who's writing it, the person or the audience that the essay is intended for, and what the writer is trying to communicate, the purpose of the essay. So I've been trying to give you in these instructions something to do that's going to teach you how to find what to write about in an introduction or a conclusion in a given paper. So for this assignment, I'm asking you to do the obvious. I'm going to use stamp collecting as an example of a peculiar hobby when I'm discussing the hobby to illustrate the assignment here. So those of you that are not familiar with stamp collecting, you might think you know what it is, just getting a bunch of stamps, but it is a much more involved and subtle activity. My mom used to collect stamps. She has an enormous stamp collection, probably worth thousands and thousands of dollars. That's not why she collects the stamps or why she collected the stamps, but it is the fact that she's got an enormous stamp collection. So I would need to, if I were writing about that, or if she were writing an essay to explain to you why people enjoy collecting stamps, the first thing she would have to do is to explain the nature of collecting stamps. One of the things, for example, that most people don't know about stamp collecting is that stamps are more valuable and, in fact, perhaps only tradable if they've been canceled, because it demonstrates that they've been used. A used stamp is rarer than one you just go to the post office and buy. In order to get that stamp, right, in order to get that stamp off the envelope, there's a procedure where you have to steam the stamp off the envelope. You cannot tear the paper with it. You certainly cannot tear the stamp off the paper because you will damage or destroy it. So there are certain characteristics of the activity that have to be explained before you can go about identifying the 3 reasons why people enjoy this activity. So that is something you are going to need to do with your own paper. If you're writing about hunting, you can't write about hunting in general. For example, there are different types of hunting. There's turkey hunting, there's duck hunting, there's deer hunting. Or squirrel hunting. Nobody's going to confuse squirrel hunting with deer hunting. They involve different actions, they involve different procedures. Although they both have as their focal point killing an animal, which is what they all have in common, they go about it in different ways. So you would need to explain that. So explain the activity. Once you have finished introducing your activity, it's time for the thesis statement. Again, I've been giving you a very focused format for presenting thesis statements and topic sentences because I want you to understand and be able to repeat when I'm not around this formula, because it contains everything that needs to be said in a thesis statement without any additions, without any distractions, nothing that that would possibly confuse the reader about what the essay is about. So for an essay like this, I recommend that you select and choose, sorry, that you choose to follow this particular format. People enjoy, and fill in the blank with your example or with your activity, in this case collecting stamps, for 3 reasons. Colon, not semicolon. If you write a semicolon, everything that follows will be a fragment. Semicolons function as periods most of the time. I highly recommend not using semicolons at all, except in the very rare case that you are separating phrases that have commas in them. And I don't even want to get into that. For the most part, you will probably never need to use a semicolon. So if you do use one, you better look at the semicolon section of the textbook to find out exactly how to use them. So colon, and then what I have are 3 reasons. This might not be the reasons that an avid stamp collector would give, but these are the ones I'm presenting. So, to release anxiety, to own a piece of history, and to have something to brag about. I want to point out the release of anxiety. That is what is sometimes known as escape, but I don't want you to use the term escape because it still begs the question, escape from what? It's anxiety. I think all activities allow us to escape from the anxiety of everyday life, our responsibilities, our problems, all of these things. So if you are at a loss for reasons why people enjoy the activity you've selected, you can pretty well guess that releasing anxiety is one of those reasons. So this is your thesis statement. Once you've established that and written that, then it's time to move on to the body paragraphs. The body paragraphs in this essay don't have a particular form aside from the topic sentence and then the supporting material. That is quite different from the last essay that you wrote. What's going to make or break your body paragraphs is cause-effect logic. And I actually have a presentation about how to use cause-effect logic to establish the to demonstrate how a particular cause leads to the enjoyment of the activity. I'm not going to cover that here because I already have that presentation in the building a paragraph or building paragraphs section of the resource book. So please make sure that you read that, or sorry, not read it, watch it carefully, watch it several times. There are a number of ways you can present reasons for something. I'm going to give you one way that if you follow it, you will certainly be able to produce a very logical set of what are called causal chains that can lead one from the activity to the enjoyment. In this case, the example I'm going to use is stamp collecting and how it relieves anxiety. So we've already kind of talked about that. I'm going to show you how to build one of those paragraphs in that particular presentation. The cause-effect logic then is what will be covered in that presentation. Examples, not the same kind of examples. You may want to use an example in a body paragraph, but while I should say, while the previous two essays were constructed around either complex examples, such as the first essay, or a gathering of specific examples and details to support a judgment, as in the second essay. In this case, it's really going to be the cause-effect logic. So you pay very close attention to that presentation. So we end with a conclusion, and as I've already said, there is no rule, there are strategies. What should your conclusion deal with? Well, this is what I recommend. It's actually part of the assignment itself. King recommends horror movies. He thinks that they are therapeutic. He doesn't actually use that word, but that is what his primary argument is, that that horror movies allow us to indulge in our anti-social and anti-civilization urges, these things that are deep within us, these desires that society forbids us from acting on. He says that it allows us to give expression to them without actually hurting anybody. So, unlike some do-gooders in society who believe that horror movies inspire people to do terrible things, King thinks it has the opposite effect. He thinks it allows us to avoid doing terrible things. So he recommends it. Your conclusion should follow that pattern. You should spend the conclusion explaining then why or why not, having presented all of this information, a person should or should not engage in this activity. Why you would recommend it, why you would not recommend it. So go ahead and use that strategy as your conclusion. And this is it. I tried to give you some verbal instruction here and clarify the written instructions. I hope this helps. If you have any questions, please let me know.